expected earlier. Do you think this will in fact defeat the purpose of revenue maximization for government?
We do believe that there would be adequate participation in the auction, and that given the totality of the terms that have been decided, not just the reserve price, but reserve price, spectrum usage charge, mortgage of spectrum, terms of payment, etc., that participation should not be much of an issue, and therefore it would strike a balance between making participation attractive, ensuring that government gets a fair share of revenues, ensuring minimal impact on the consumers, and at the same time ensuring that the viability of the industry is not impacted substantially.
So there is a sense that telcos will cherry pick and have a selective bidding approach, and they may be many be no pan-India bids. Is that true?
Well, I think each operator would finalize its own strategy based on their perception of the market opportunities, their own strengths, and so on. And that is something which it would be difficult for me to comment on, but I'm sure that each company would finalize its own strategy as it sees best.
Right, but Mr. Chandrasekhar, though this is a policy decision and telecoms have limited recourse, do you expect some kind of resistance from operators?
Well, I don't think that there is going to be any resistance, and different people certainly may have their own view of what price would be appropriate, and there have been several views floating around. But at the end of the day, I don't believe that it's a question of resistance at all. It's just a question of different people having different expectations, different comfort levels, and different aspirations. But at the end of the day, for the government, it is a matter of striking a balance between several competing objectives of ensuring that the rollout of services and the affordability of telecom continues to be what it ought to be in the interests of the common man, ensuring that the government gets its fair share of revenues, and at the same time ensuring that the viability of the industry also continues to be intact.
So, Mr. Chandrasekhar, operators who won spectrum in 2008 are yet to make money at the EBITDA level itself. With spectrum prices hike substantially, is there justification when telcos say business will become unviable?
You see, government obviously would not be able to take into account a particular company, the impact on an individual company, or even a particular group of companies. When government looks at the impact on industry, it looks at the impact across the board. And as long as the impact across the board on the industry is such that the viability is not impacted, what could happen to individual companies is not so much a matter of concern. These are matters of competitiveness of individual companies, and that is something which depends on the dynamics within the industry and between one company and another. But if you look at the totality, then that's the picture which the government necessarily has to take into account. And that's exactly what has been done in this case.
Right, Mr. Chandrasekhar, final question. The August 31st deadline will be missed by the government. What will be the timeline for conducting the auction, and what could be the practical timeline for concluding the auctions?
Well, we had filed our expected timeline initially when the IA had been filed, the interlocutory application in the Supreme Court, indicating the timelines that we expected the whole auction process would take place. But keeping in mind the Supreme Court directives, I think every effort has been made to speed up the process as much as possible. Now all the decisions that the government needed to take to facilitate and accelerate the auction process have by and large been taken. They are in place. The decks have been cleared for the conduct of the auction, and from this point on it is largely the mechanics of the auction. For this there are two things that need to be kept in mind. Number one is that of course an auctioneer has to be selected. That process is at the final stages, and by early next week that process would be completed. The second thing is that once the auctioneer is in place, then we will need to firm up the actual schedule for the rest of the auction process, the mechanics of the auction, as I said. This involves several steps, the information memorandum, the notice inviting applications. Each of these are preceded by a publication, a consultation, a pre-bid, and so on. And finally mock auctions, so that the bidders also are familiar with the process involved and how it translates in the electronic domain. Now for each of these a certain amount of time would be required because the auctioneer has to do its job. The bidders need to get familiar. They need to have enough time to take their decisions for the auction, and therefore how far this can be optimized, what is the maximum compression of this time that is possible given the urgency that has been underlined by the Supreme Court, is something which we will get a final clarity on only after the auctioneer is in place. And once we have the final optimized schedule, then we would be able to comment on what the final timelines would look like.
Okay, Mr. Chandrasekhar, appreciate you taking the time out and joining us today on ET Now to get us more clarity on the subject. Let's take the discussion forward, and we are now joined by Sanjeev Aga, former MD at Idea Cellular as well. Sanjeev, hi, morning. The final reserve price approved by the cabinet is nearly 8 to 9 times the 2008 price. The industry has been lobbying fiercely to oppose it. Do you think an auction conducted at this base price is going to break the back of telcos?
For a moment, don't go into the price, whether it is 14 or 15 or 4 or 40. Just look at the principle. The Supreme Court, I'm giving you an example. The Supreme Court has on an average cancelled 6 spectrum slots per circle. That's an average. Now what the government has done is that it is putting out 2 for auction and it is withdrawing 4. So this has 2 implications. I don't think the Supreme Court order allows the government to do this. So one, I think it is violative of the Supreme Court order. This is my plain reading, as I've read the order 100 times. Number 2, not 100 times obviously, but a few times. Number 2, even if the government does this, it is nothing but confiscation without compensation, which will land, I think, our country into all kinds of problems with both Indian and foreign shareholders. So what we've done is that you've taken 6 slots, 6 have been cancelled, you have pocketed 4, you're putting out 2, you're creating an artificial scarcity, and now to back up the scarcity you're erecting a second barrier, which is a sky high auction reserve price. This is not what the Supreme Court has in any way suggested, and a high spectrum price is nothing but another barrier, another confiscation. Now from this you will come to an administered price, I would say a rigged price. So if 1651 crores for an All India permit was wrong, this will be equally wrong. Whether you make it 15 or 14 or 18,000 crores is cold comfort to me. I think as a principle it is wrong. So you're going to use another administered price to distribute spectrum in the future. I just don't think this is the way to go.
Right, Sanjeev, but can we expect aggressive bidding for the current spectrum like we saw for 3G airways?
There are 2 kinds of, I get your question, there are 2 kinds of participants. There are, let us say, a telco who is not in India, let us say a foreign telco, or one of the many who had applied in 2007 and who were cut off, like DLF and Parasnath, and there were many of them. I don't see any one of them coming into, so as such, this is by definition an auction where the reserve price is eliminating new entrants. What you might have, now just to take an example of a company like Uninor, which I've read in the papers that today that their project cost is almost $4 billion. Now what option do they have? Either they write off that to zero, or they try to salvage whatever. Now you can't call this an auction. This is really a setup. You set up people, then you change the rules of the game, and then you get them to bid. You can call it an auction, but in my dictionary this is extortion.
So do you think the final discovered price could be much higher despite the resistance around the base price for the auction?
I doubt very much, but there is so much unknown. There is the question of the one-time, retrospective, prospective, and there is, as I told you, a situation where people have been set up, people have got networks, so what do they do? It's very hard to say what will happen, but I just don't see where the money will come from. If you look at the telecom sector, and I have known it intimately, even though I am not connected any longer, I can tell you that the majority, or not the majority, but a large number of Indian telcos today cannot pay off ever the debt they already have. The banks may not recognize it, the shareholders may not recognize it in their public statements, but these are NPAs. Now, if you expect that, these people are going to draw more debt, and you want to ease it by mortgaging spectrum or giving this thing, you might get some facile or very, short-term fillip. But actually you will not only wreck the telecom sector in any case, if they take more debt, it's going to be a problem, but you will put a burden on the banking sector, and I can tell you the banking sector is already carrying NPAs which are not showing up.
So do you think operators which have a strong balance sheet strength, companies like Bharti, Idea, which have a strong all India presence, they will be able to bid and buy expensive airways?
It's hard for me to, I know the answer, but I can't be specific. I can't be naming companies. But I can tell you that the number of companies which have the capacity are very few to raise more debt and to service it. They are less than the number of fingers in your hand, and I would not include the thumb. But does it make sense for them? Not under normal circumstances. It will not get a return on capital employed. But in a situation where you are under duress, where your existing large business is threatened, for which you've got whatever investments of 50, 60, 70,000 crores, you may under some pressure have to part with some money, but it's certainly not good news.
But the industry has been crying foul that an auction at these prices could lead to tariffs nearly doubling. Do you think those claims are a bit exaggerated then?
No, absolutely not. I'll just give you an equation to work out. I heard some time back that the government has plans to raise 2.15 lakh crores. I don't know if it is over a period of time or what period they're talking of. But the sector revenues net of taxes is less than 1 lakh crores. The sector's ability to borrow is negative. Now, assuming that the auction actually goes ahead and fetches this kind of price or this kind of collection over the short or long term, this money can find an outlet in only 3 manners. Number 1, higher price to the consumer. Number 2, companies going into liquidation. Or number 3, banks finding themselves with non-performing assets. I cannot predict in this uncertain environment which of these 3. But in case prices do not rise, then it will mean that there will be liquidation of company and there will be NPAs. If the other 2 are not to happen, then the prices have to rise. Now no one, frankly, in this uncertain environment can tell you whether it's going to be 20 paisa, 30 paisa. These are very esoteric calculations which have no meaning. It is like, saying that if a car goes from 1 kilometer per hour to 100 kilometers per hour in 20 seconds, then in 40 seconds it will go to 1000 and, in 2 minutes it will go to 1 lakh. That's not how, after a certain stage, business just starts cracking up.
Right. So, Mr. Aga, will we find bidders adopting a selective bidding strategy in these auctions?
I think the dynamic this time is too convoluted, too complex, and at least I would not even work on the assumption that, this is a policy for the next 20 years. I'm not connected with the sector, but I've heard it too often before. And